What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Hive Prometheus. Today, it's time to go over a new tier list. Pariah Nexus has been out for about 3 weeks now. We have some okay data rolling in, and I went ahead and made this another community tier list. I wanted to get a lot of different people's inputs because playing the different Tyranid detachments has a much different way of building your list and flavor of playing. So I wanted to get other people's input than just my own again. So let's go ahead and jump into the tier list, and I'm just going to go from the top down and explain the rationale, and I'm going to try to remember as many of the supporting arguments for or against those units as I go through. Okay, I'm going to try to be quick, efficient, and fluid going through these, going from the top to the bottom. First in line at nearly always taken is Exocrines. Their strength went to strength 9 from strength 8. It's some of our better shooting. It has the ability to wound medium transports and light vehicles on 4s or 3s now. And their points go up. They are a staple for almost every detachment, and you're sorely missing out if you're not bringing 1 or 2. Biovore, even though it lost the ability for the Spore Mines to score by doing actions, it can still get you area denial behind enemy lines and engage on all fronts. It also is a cheap backline piece with a large base to screen out deep strikers, and if you do end up losing it, it's not the end of the world. Lictors at 55 for what they do fill a great role for being an infiltrator, stealth, having precision. If they're in Synapse, they're strength 8, so they're much better at singling out low toughness 4 wound characters in order to get a CP. I think overall, Lictors in your list, 1 or 2 of them is going to be a staple as well. Going on to often used in 3+ detachments, Hormigons I think are our best battle line. So I think people are going to be teching into pieces that are going to have to do secondaries more so than getting to the middle of the board unless you're a mid-range or melee army. In that case, you can still use them to wrap rhinos or other transports or to go engage things with a higher OC. Gargoyles are second in line now. They're not as good just because they have a larger footprint. They're harder to hide. Yes, they can still move block, as I said, but that's not going to be as important. They still have high OC, but they lost a little bit of efficiency just because Unending can't champion a 20-man brick of gargoyles and bring them back multiple times in a row. You're probably only going to see them in bricks of 10, and you're only going to see about 1 and less when they're taken. Next up is Genestealers and Broodlords. Because of the buff to Synapse strength, specifically having Genestealers are strength 5 and Broodlords to strength 7 hits some important breakpoints. Their damage efficiency is high just because of a base number of attacks, and Dev Wounds and Vanguard Onslaught gained some important units that specifically gained the Vanguard Invader keyword, thus making Vanguard a very strong pick. Maleceptors have dropped a little bit. They're still incredibly tanky and very efficient. Again, their increase to strength and melee makes them strength 10, but it's only 3 attacks at strength 10 with their strike, and it's going to be 6 attacks at strength 8. That's still good. That's much better than it was before. However, in comparison to the things that have overtaken it, it hasn't shifted that much. I think it came down a couple places. The Tyrannifex has come up from, I believe, often used in 2 or often used in 1 to often used in 3. You're seeing them often in Crusher now, often in Synaptic Nexus or Invasion, and sometimes you're also seeing them in Assimilation. Their new damage minimum was originally their damage average previously with 2d6, so I think they're awesome for their points. The Hive Tyrant, because of the added ability to his aura being onslaught and lethals, it is very potent when matched with Exocrines in lists, when you're having 2 or 3 of them, or if you have 2 Exocrines and 2 Maleceptors, like I've seen in Invasion and Synaptic Nexus lists. He also reduces the cost of stratagems within 12 inches of him when a unit is targeted by 1. At the very end of often used in 3 is the Neurotyrant. Because of the change to Synapse for Shadow in the Warp specifically, if you are within 6 inches of a Synapse unit when Shadow in the Warp is procced, you suffer an additional -1. Just having the Neurotyrant in your list and being within 6 inches of a Synapse creature means you're taking that test at -2. Having her as a 105-point tech piece just for Battle Shock alone makes her very valuable. The unit after that, in often used in 2+ attachments, is split because you're seeing the Neurotyrant being brought alone sometimes, not always in the Brain Council. If you don't know what the Brain Council is, that is the attached leader Neurotyrant to a squad of 6 Zoanthropes so that they're able to hit on 2s, and it gives them some extra bonuses such as Big Nuns Never Tire can be used on them, even though the Zoanthropes are not monster models. Big Guns Never Tire can target a monster unit to allow them to shoot in combat and out of combat without the penalty, so they still hit on 2s. A little bit of a weird interaction. It's still to be seen if that's going to be FAQ'd, but it's still very useful. Old One Eye has dropped. He's being used in Invasion and sometimes in Crusher Stampede as solo. I'm not necessarily sure if he's being brought in a whole lot of detachments, seeing as T9 ends up being pretty low, and a lot of armies now are teching into higher strength and higher AP weapons. So unless you're using him as a rapid ingress threat, running him off the board can be kind of risky on the new terrain. Norn emissaries have come up a little bit and often used in 2. They're being championed in Synaptic Nexus, and I think that they have a solid place in Crusher Stampede, whether you're using 1 or 2 of them, because it takes away some of Crusher Stampede's primary problem. Having a minimum number of bodies makes it harder to readjust and go and attack objectives. Death Leaper and the Neurolictor as Battle Shock tech have come down a little bit because they're often being used in Vanguard Onslaught because they do have that keyword, and because of the Battle Shock tech, it specifically incentivizes play in Synaptic Nexus. Similarly, if they are in Synapse, Death Leaper goes to Strength 8, which helps him to single out characters, and he's still very useful and very good at 80 points. 3+ armor, 4+ save, 6 attacks, Strength 8 in Synapse, AP 2 for 2 precision. Going on to Swarmlord, he has come up a little bit because he's being used in some detachments, specifically for the CP gen, and because of the vectability within 12 inches. He increases the cost of stratagems on enemy units that are targeted within 12 inches of him. I think this can be incredibly useful if you run into a lot of melee-heavy armies or into mid-range armies that are going to be CP hungry in order to keep units on objectives, such as fights first, gaining lethals, or regenning on points. He additionally, with the Synapse change, is now 8 attacks at Strength 10, AP 2 for 3 twin linked. He's a good beat stick. If you want to throw some Tyrant Guard with him, it's pretty costly, but it at least gives him some ablative wounds. It just makes his footprint larger, so you just have to be aware of movement shenanigans and moving through ruins. The Flyrant has come up a little bit because, as I said, Vanguard Onslaught is probably one of the stronger detachments this season. He also is additionally being seen sometimes in Assimilation. Specifically his tech to ward off melee threats away from Tyrant Guard, Zone Throws, and other things that you'd want to regen on points. The Haruspex has moved up a little bit. He originally was in fringe use, but he's come up because you're seeing one of them being used in Assimilation, and I think he's a staple monster in Crusher Stampede. 125 points as an attack dog lends himself to be something that if he's able to go and kill something, he gets his points back pretty easily, but if you end up losing him, it's not at a huge cost to your list overall. Pyrovores have also moved up because, similarly to the Haruspex, they're being seen as a staple unit in Crusher Stampede because of the incentivization not to always use Storm-Guided Missiles. You want to be able to have all of your units gain their full AP when you shoot a unit because he can strip cover. And in Assimilation, sometimes you're seeing people run squads of 1 to 3 of him. The Moloch came up from fringe use to often used in 1 detachment because he gained the Vanguard Onslaught Invader keyword, so he's being taken in Vanguard Onslaught. Now specifically because he can go into reserve multiple times and he can come out and force battle shocks and mortals over and over. I think the Moloch is extremely powerful. I wouldn't be surprised if his points go up, so enjoy him at 145 while you can. Screamer Killers also came up specifically because their Battle Shock tech is re-incentivized with the Neurotyrant, Death Leaper, Neurotyrant, and being within Synapse. So I think he's specifically very good in Synaptic Nexus right now. Melee Warriors have come down a little bit. They're not being seen as often in Vanguard Onslaught, but they are still being taken in there. Some people are running them in Invasion just because you can give them crit and sustain lethals on 5s. By stacking the Tyranid Primes sustained and lethals from Invasion. The Parasited Mortrex came up from fringe use specifically just for Synaptic Nexus because now for 95 points you can put the Dirshard of Karis, and there's ways for you to stack leadership modifiers and modifiers to Battle Shock, specifically so you could potentially make units take their leadership checks at -4. So for 95 points, he is pretty useful in Synaptic Nexus, but I don't think you're going to be seeing him used in other places. Carnifexes are also relegated to 1 detachment right now. They're not being taken anywhere except Invasion, and specifically as buddies for Old One-Eye. They create an incredible brick that you can give the 5+ female pain to from rapid regeneration, and they end up being a very good Overwatch threat that a lot of people don't anticipate the damage. Psychophages have come up from fringe use a little bit because you are seeing them being used in 2s or 3s in Assimilation. Sometimes I see people splash them into Synaptic Nexus or Crusher, but it's not used often. Tyrant Guard additionally are being used in Assimilation a lot just because you can match them with Neurotyrants or with Swarmlord or Hive Tyrant, and they end up getting an enhancement that allows them with the change to Synapse to get to Strength 10 AP 2 for 2 on their Crushing Claws. Things that have moved down to fringe use, Raveners, I think, have been moved down because the relative mobility of our units is still very high, and with the inability to get to a lot of the deployments or and the specific change to capture enemy outposts being taken out of Pariah Nexus, it's not as important to attack the backfield as it was previously in Leviathan. So Raveners have moved down, and Hormagaunts, Gargoyles, and Lictors are going to be coming up in stocks when it comes to scoring your secondaries and moving about the field. Barbagons I had down in fringe use because orcs were a relative threat in Leviathan. They have subsequently seen quite a few nerfs, so I don't think you're going to be seeing them as much in the mid-range or top tables. They are still a good 55-point pick if you are running into a lot of units that move to the midfield and are threats on the charge. Von Ryan Sleepers have come down, specifically because the points that you could have been spending for 6 Von Ryan Sleepers is now 5 points more expensive than you could spend for a Moloch. Molochs are tougher, they do more damage in melee, they have more attacks. At higher AP, and you can reburrow them and get mortals multiple times over. I would choose a Moloch in Vanguard Invader over Von Ryan Sleepers every time. Termagants have come down a little bit just because they're not as quick as Hormagaunts. They're not as useful as Gargoyles. They're only 5 points cheaper than Hormagaunts. I think you would see them more often if they were 50 or 55 points, but the 5-point difference between Hormagaunts and Termagants means I would also rather take Hormagaunts over Termagants every time. The Norn Assimilator is still in fringe use because he is 290 points, and I think he needs one of a few rules. He either needs Leaper Killer like the Dimacron had to move over buildings for free, he needs Advance and Charge, he needs full rerolls all the time, or he has Dev Wounds. Pick 2 of those 4. And then he's worth 290 points. Otherwise, I think he needs to be dropped 55 points like the Tyrannifex was. He's an awesome model. I would love to run a Crusher Stampede list with 2 or 3 of them because I do have the Norns, but the premium that you pay for his relative uselessness is immense. Trigons have come down a little bit as well, similarly to how I said that Raveners don't specifically threaten the backfield as much and they can't score you, capture enemy outpost. He's still just T10, 3+ armor with no invuln unless you run him in Synaptic Nexus and you choose the 5+ invuln imperative on that turn. He also is going to be running alone a lot of the time, so he can't benefit from getting +1 strength in Synapse. So he's not going to reach that strength 10 breakpoint unless you deep strike him into the midfield and he is next to a Maleceptor or Hive Tyrant or something like that. I think there is play if you want to make Trigons work. I just don't think they're as efficient point-wise or damage-wise as some of the other units that I've explained previously. Tervagons were being seen in Invasion just specifically so that you could regen additional gaunts, but because of the change to Unending Swarm only being allowed to regen a unit of battle line once instead of multiple times, I think she's relegated to fringe use. She did come down in points to 175, so you could potentially arm her to be a slightly more expensive old One-Eye at T11. But I think it's going to be the same thing as the Trigon. You can make her work, it takes additional brain power investment. Sporocysts actually came up a little bit. This is the funny thing. Because of the change to OC on unwounded monsters in Crusher Stampede, his OC 0 goes to OC 2. So he actually could hold your backfield objective if you really wanted to. That's the only reason he's moved up from the Shadow Realm. Neurogons, again, they're cheap, but I think one thing that separates them from being used more often is if they had the battle line keyword, then you would probably see them and used often in 1 or 2 detachments. They are 45 points, but for 10 points less, you could just take a Pyrovore. And the Pyrovore is tougher, and it offers an important ability to strip cover from those things that we have hard times cracking, like transports and land raiders and things with 2+ armor in the first place. Venomthropes have dropped down to fringe use because of Unending Swarm. You're not incentivized to give cover and -1 to hit to a whole lot of swarms of things now. A lot of people are running sort of combined arms lists now. You're seeing monsters, medium bugs, and small bugs sort of in an even array now, unless you're playing Crusher Stampede. Synaptic Nexus, although does like playing trashless lists, they can get away very well because they can attack into multiple Norns, so they don't necessarily need a whole lot of bodies in the first place. And at the very bottom of fringe use is the Hierophant and the Harridan, just because of their immense points. The investment into them takes away from a lot of the efficiency and the other tech pieces that you could be having in your list in the first place. There have been instances where people have taken a Hierophant or 2 in Crusher Stampede and done relatively well in 3 or 4 round events, but in GTs, they end up being filtered out a lot by those top armies. And the same goes for the Harridan. The Harridan is just not as good because it's not as high toughness. It's a flyer. Flyer rules are pretty bad. The amount of points you're paying for 30 wounds at T10 is something like 20.5 points per wound, whereas even an Assimilator, which is also in the same tier, is 18 points per wound. And a Norn Emissary, which has higher defensiveness and higher OC and better melee, not better shooting, is 17 points per wound. So the relative efficiency is bad. Usually a good breakpoint for monsters is anywhere between 10 and 15 points per wound. I believe that Maleceptors and Exocrines are somewhere between 12 and 14 points per wound by comparison. Everything else here in the Shadow Realm, I shouldn't have to explain too much. Shooting Warriors, I think, are paper. They died to normal Marines. Any shooting would tear them apart. I don't think they're worth the investment over melee warriors in the first place. The Toxicrin, yes, so the rules to pieces of your model that go over the base do allow him to move through terrain more easily, but there's not really any place in the meta where anti-infantry 2+ and AP 1 is going to be killing a lot of things. That would be good against maybe Blood Angels and maybe Custodes, but those also just kill him in melee. Hive Guard didn't really change points. The rules are not good. If you're going to run a squad of 3 or 6 of them, I think they have to additionally gain on their shock cannons devastating wounds. If they gained that keyword so that we actually had something that had the old haywire word to do mortals to vehicles, then they'd be useful. The Tyrannocyte cannot transport creatures above 14 wounds, so the 2 creatures that I would want to transport in them, the Norn Assimilator and the Tyrannifex, can't go in them, and it doesn't have the Assault Ramp keyword or a similar rule to it, so you cannot charge after disembarking from the Tyrannocyte. And it's 105 points. It's too expensive. It's unusable. I would really love to see a change to this model. Rippers, because they went to 25 points per model for a single and 50 for 3, you're not even seeing them in assimilation. You're not even using them for the Harvester keyword. And all the things that are already terrible. The Hive Guard and the Harpy are bad. They're too many points, and they do no damage. Spore Mines, although they have the highest damage efficiency into Knights, you're not seeing Knights at top tables yet because there's a lot of opposing armies that bring them down to the mid-tables and they get filtered out. And similarly, you're not bringing Muculids. Rest in peace to the Hyrule. They went to Legends during the Pariah Nexus change. The Dimacrin has been in Legends, same with the Malanthrope and the Stonecrusher Carnifex and Meiotic Spores. So I hope this gives you a better, more well-rounded picture of what Pariah Nexus for Tyranids is looking like this season. I want to thank everybody who subscribed recently. We are over 700 subscribers. I'm glad that I'm able to give you information that will arm you with knowledge and tactics beyond that which you would have gained in your own gameplay. I hope you learned something today, and I'll catch you next time on Hive Prometheus.